But when you rent, look at rent over a 10-year, I don't care how many years you look at it. Look at what rent has done. It's gone up.
And I always look at the choices that people make in their lives in 18 to 30 years old that put them in positions where now the market owns them. $240,000 you spent in 10 years with nothing to show for it.
What is our net difference here? We have $190,000 that we gained over just a 10-year period.
Are you just avoiding responsibility?
Today we're going to be talking about renting versus buying. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? And which is right for you?
Is renting a waste of money? Is buying even affordable anymore? Let's break it down, because in 2025, the right answer depends entirely on your situation.
You got it. I'm Andrew, your Spokane mortgage man. I am your resource for all things home financing here in Spokane. I'm joined by my co-host,
Pat Kostecka, the real estate specialist in Spokane.
Okay, Pat, let's get into renting first. This tends to be the more obvious option for what's attainable for most when they're looking into housing that's outside of, mom or dad's house, and so to speak. So with that, what are the first benefits or some of the benefits that come to mind when you think about renting that would be on the forefront?
Flexibility, number one, no doubt about it. You're not into a long-term commitment. You're in one location. You can go to another location as long as you've met your contractual obligations to the lease.
The lease, yeah.
It's easy to move around for your work or for even your lifestyle.
Yeah, that's a little bit less commitment, a lot more flexibility. One of the first things that comes to my mind when I'm thinking about renting is there's a little bit more ways to try and lower your upfront costs. And now, I will say, especially as a mortgage loan officer, there are loan programs that can make your first month's rent, your security deposit, those move-in costs of renting. There are loan programs that can make those pretty equal to how much money you need to get into a home. However, it is much easier for me to go find a roommate and split and break up, my first month's rent, my move-in cost, to make it very, very low how much I need to get in. To which, if I tried to do that, like say, hey, Pat, you want to go buy a house with me? And you're kind of someone I'm just rooming with. I don't really know you that well. We're getting into more of a marriage where I would say renting a lease, maybe more of an engagement. Right? Not quite as severe. Like, there are still contractual agreements there, but not quite as severe as like a divorce, so to speak. So that's the first one that comes to my mind. What else do you got as far as renting benefits?
Well, I mean, it's nice that you don't have to pay the taxes on the building. You don't have to pay the maintenance costs, the repairs. You may or may not have to do lawn care, depends. And just major fixes, landlord covers all of that.
Those are huge items. And I tell people this all the time, that we got to get you into a position to buy where you're not going to have any regrets. Largest purchase of your life, probably. I don't want you to have a regret with that. So if the furnace goes out in the middle of winter and now your house is freezing cold, you're running the further risk, not just having to replace a furnace that could be $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, depending on your options. But what if you can't find anyone that quick? It's Christmas Day and it's below zero like we get here in Spokane, and those pipes freeze because you had to go find out, how am I going to pay for this? Can I get money from these people? And it took you 3, 4, 5 days to pay for that furnace repair. Or maybe, where's your credit at? Can you finance it? I mean, that could lead to devastation, tens of thousands of dollars. If you own that property, you have to pay for that. Otherwise, as a renter, you're more carefree. Pick up the phone. Hey, landlord, this kind of sucks. I have to give you this news, but my furnace is out and I'm freezing cold. And now it's on, say us, more of the landlord type people. And those are things that we're a bit more well equipped to handle.
Definitely.
That one is huge of a benefit for renting. When I say I know there's benefits to renting, I'm not going to deny them. That is at the forefront of what I tell people. Now, other benefits as well, when it comes to where they want to live. How many times, we work with folks and they have a budget. We all have a budget. And sometimes there's different marks, when you're going in price, that we hate to admit it, but some price points kind of lock you into certain areas or certain types of homes to get to different areas. And it can be a challenge. Whereas renting, I would say there are some other locations that open up to you at maybe more affordable price points. We'll break down a scenario here shortly that'll compare, okay, what's my monthly cost, my this and that for buying at this price versus renting. But typically, I can say go rent something at maybe the higher rent range in Spokane, like $2,500, maybe $3,000, and get into a high value property, higher, that's probably a $500,000 to $600,000, maybe even $700,000 property for that rent range of $2,500 to $3,000. On the contrary, if I said, why don't I just buy that $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 property, I'm going to need a lot of money down to get to my payment to be where I would pay to rent that property. Right? So that benefit, just to kind of put it into a nutshell, is I'm typically going to have access to better locations at lower upfront monthly costs. Now, we're going to talk about later the right here, right now, or the long term. And that's when we'll pan over and we'll start talking about some of the benefits to owning real estate.
So, Andrew, another thing that goes with the flexibility is you don't have to worry at all about what the market is doing with the value of that home. I just recently bought an RV, and I was trading one in, and they wanted to give me half of what I owed.
Oh,
Ouch.
Man. So an underwater scenario, we call it, where you owe more than the value of that asset.
Now, of course, we know that RVs aren't really something you invest in other than, yay.
Yeah, I would agree with that in a sense that you can up and move, and not have to worry about, like, am I going to potentially lose money having to get rid of this house because I now own it and I have to do something with it, And maybe you look into renting, and maybe that's your avenue to, potentially investing. But if those two exit strategies aren't available, you could find yourself on the losing side of the coin flip.
That's correct. Well, Andrew, it almost sounds like we're encouraging people to rent. So why are we even in front of this camera right now?
Like you highlighted, in 2025, it depends on your scenario. I'm not going to say everyone right now should go buy a house. Everyone who can and should go buy a house right now should start to take some action steps and do it, because the benefits far outweigh in the long run. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the benefits of buying a house. And Pat, what comes to mind for you right away?
Well, the first thing is, if you're just renting for many, many years, you really probably aren't changing your life that much. It's expensive to rent, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. You talked about the upfront costs aren't as great, but it's still expensive. So why do we encourage you to buy? Well, I can tell you right off the bat, it can be life-changing if you're willing to grind away at it. What you do know what's going to happen is, through time, that value of that house is going to go up, which means the principal that you have built up, the appreciation goes up, which is awesome.
Appreciation, yeah.
Yep. And then the other piece of it is, like, what can you do with it during hard times if you buy? Well, could you rent a room out? Could you actually rent the house and go rent?
Yeah, that most people I know who became, landlords or rented property kind of fell into it on accident, because they were in a situation where they say, well, geez, if I sold this house right now, maybe it's not the most beneficial for them. Maybe they have capital gains taxes. I don't know, whatever the circumstance could be. And it might benefit them too. Then they look at, well, what does renting looks like? Or, someone they know who's an expert, in real estate tells them, well, why don't we look at renting? And then they go, oh, that works out. So I do know several people who stumbled into becoming a landlord. And with that, a lot of the things too is because when you buy a property, you fixed that loan payment, right? But when you rent, look at rent over a 10-year, I don't care how many years you look at it. Look at what rent has done. It's gone up. You mentioned when you bought, property even before a housing crash, and then the values of your property went down, but the rents stayed the same. A lot of instances I've actually seen, they went up because banks and lenders stopped the flow of money. Less people could buy, and now there's more people forced into the renter pool.
Yep.
So I've heard of that as well.
And people are still having babies, so
true.
And the graduates keep coming from high school, from college, and the renters will be there.
Yes, yeah, the renter demand, gosh, has got to be stronger than ever, with the different challenges and that we've faced and that we continue to overcome and provide solutions for people that we assist to help make it more, more doable, more accomplishable.
Yep.
So we talked about rising rents. We talked about, fixed loan payments, because that's a big one. When you buy a property, you set your loan amount and you set what that loan payment is going to be. And so when we get 10 years out, a lot of people in Spokane, this is a common one. I'm sure you've heard this before. Man, I look at what housing payments are, what rents are right now, but my brother who bought, 8 years ago, his housing payment's only $1,000, right? And they get so discouraged by that. Well, that's because brother got smart, bought something 8 years ago and fixed that loan payment, right? Maybe his taxes and insurance can fluctuate a little bit, but that's usually, the minority of the overall payment.
One thing I like to tell people is I always think about if you're standing by a river and you're watching that water flow, if you don't jump in, you are just going to take what's ever coming out of your control. Totally. Like to be in control, you need to jump into that river so they're flowing together. So you talk about it, in mathematics, we talk about proportionality. And so if you're flowing with it now, as the income goes up that you have in your regular job, or the rents go up, but the PI, principal interest, stays the same, that's when things start rising for you. If you're just a renter, you're not gaining at all.
I get what you're saying. If you're a renter, you're on the riverbank, to break this analogy down. If you're in the river, you're flowing with the market rising, essentially, and you're going along for the ride there. But let's say, I don't know, the bottom of the river, so to speak, your payment, it would be fixed, right? So your monthly is nice and fixed, but you can ride, the wave, as people also tend to refer to it as, to be able to capture that equity.
Yes.
Which is a big one. You talked about equity, from the jump. We're going to talk about another scenario here in a moment where we actually give a borrower scenario or a purchase scenario. Should I rent? Should I buy? And it's going to be so clear how long-term differences come into play and how drastically different, your financial standing could be from this one decision right here. It's an important one, and that's why that smart start is so crucial.
Let's do it.
All right.
Well, Andrew, another thing about ownership that's awesome is the freedom to personalize. Can you imagine?
Big time.
I'm going to tell you, as a landlord, if I walk into a house when someone moved out and they painted a room pink, it's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, no, that's not happening, because that's not the way it looked before. Now it's going to cost me to go back and fix that to make it the way it was before. That's why we have security deposits. But if you own, you got to do that your own. And I would suggest, be really smart, be willing to grind, be willing to do the painting yourself. You have so much ability, HGTV will tell you that, to be able to go down and buy what you need and to do that work. And what I love is the inspiration on those shows, that they just show the common person who no matter who they are, that you can actually figure it out, even tile, and which is pretty awesome. And I've seen friends of mine who've done their work. I'm pretty impressed.
That was a huge thing. YouTube, okay? You can learn just about anything. That's why you're here today, learning about something that's important to you.
YouTube University.
Yes, and when I bought some of my first properties, same thing. I would DIY, and I learned a lot, a great knowledge base, but I would go on YouTube, how to, and I would get a video that showed me exactly how to tackle these things. I do agree with two things. Number one, the freedom to personalize and do what you want to your property to improve it is so rewarding. It's rewarding in your quality of life. It's in sense of accomplishment, but it is also can be very rewarding with the equity and the property value.
Yes.
Right. You can learn a new skill, and you can also boost the property, the value of that property substantially.
One note I'd like to make, and I've seen people who think they have to do things to their house that's going to boost it but doesn't. One great example is windows. I've seen people spend thousands of dollars on
It's expensive.
on windows.
I paid a lot for windows.
But yet when they go to sell their house, the new buyer doesn't care. Like I've seen people spend thousands of dollars because less heat loss. But do you realize the mathematics it would take to get that money back? And if you had vinyl windows before and you still have white vinyl windows, the buyer doesn't know the difference. You don't have to have all the fancy appliances. Just have some nice ones. Pick and choose your battles. Be smart. Do the math. Get educated. And ask people who've done it. Hey, what did you like that you did? What would you probably do different?
Those are some great points, Pat. The freedom to be able to do what you want with your property, that's a big one. And another thing I'll say, just to kind of piggyback on that, is pets, right? A lot of times pets, if you have pets or you get pets, maybe one rental allows it and then you move to your next one and suddenly your options have dwindled a bunch because there's no pet policies or you have to decide to pay. Maybe they do allow pets, but now they charge you pet rent and a pet deposit, and maybe it's non-refundable pet fee at that point, so to speak. Whereas when you own the house, you don't have to ask the landlord to get the dog. Go get the dog. I made a video on this a long time ago, but it was like, just get the dog.
Get the dog.
Go get the dog.
Don't get the cat. I'm allergic to those.
Right. Please be a responsible dog owner. There are things that go along with that, but yeah, you just get that freedom to, if you want to set up a little, bonfire pit in the backyard, you want to bring a trampoline in, right? Trampolines can be a pretty big liability, or the massive pool in the backyard that's, if that pops and there's a basement, it could flood that, right? Well, you take the risk there, and if you're going to be safe about it, you can go do those things. So lots of freedom there. Now, with freedom also comes stability, right? We see this all the time. I have a lot of folks that come to me when they're looking to buy a house, and for them, the whole reason that spurred their home search is because the landlord's selling the property, right? They didn't want to move. They loved their place. They loved the neighborhood. They had friends, neighbors that were friends, and now all of a sudden they got to pick everything up at the drop of a notice. Now, a notice, right, with X amount of days, they were given notice, but still, imagine if today, Pat, you got handed something that said, hey, you got to be out of here, anywhere from 60 to 120 days, whatever that notice has to be. And you're like, man, I love it here. My kids go to school here. How am I now going to find another rental in the same location and maybe at the same price? A lot of times when you rent, if you're a good, tenant, perhaps, I don't know whether you're good or bad, but your landlord may choose to leave the rent where it's at. A lot of times people see that as doing them a favor, because it is. Monthly expenses are a little bit less. But what happens when now you're forced to go into the market and your favor that you were given's here and your market rents are there, but your budget never adjusted?
I'll tell you, as a public teacher for many years, it's really interesting to watch kids come into your class in October.
Why is that?
Because they don't know anybody. They come in, they're super quiet, and the kids, especially in a small town, there's the new kid, and it's just it's the potential to set your children up to all of a sudden have a whole new friend group that may be great or may not be great. There's a lot of change that's happening there, for sure. And I always look at the choices that people make in their lives in 18 to 30 years old that put them in positions where now the market owns them. And that is probably one of the strongest, most passionate thing that I have about this series, A Smart Start, that we will help you make great decisions that'll help stability for your family, your children, your life, and just being so thankful for everything you've been given.
I think that what you just said is such a skill set of yours that is so unique to you, the teacher to real estate expert. I've never heard anyone bring that up. How their housing or how their their purchase or having to move and relocate, how much that can really have an effect on a family dynamic. Because we love numbers and we love diving into the, the compare this house and that house, but how often do you really dive into what if this happens and your whole family dynamic is shifted completely?
And even with your spouse or your significant other, it's stressful. I mean, how could it not be stressful?
Absolutely. Yeah. As someone who did a number of moves in a short amount of time, when we got into our last place, both my wife and I looked at each other and we said, we are not moving for another period of time. So yeah, it adds up. And that is one of the final benefits, like I said, stability and security. As long as you pay those bills and you made a decision that was a smart start, you're going to be locked in and ready to ride whatever scenario life throws at you. Now, we've already mentioned how buying outweighs renting in the long run, by far, right? But we haven't necessarily gone in and showed an example or really laid it out on the line with a comparison easy to look at. So, Pat, why don't you give them an example? We'll throw some numbers up on the screen,
Yes,
side by side, and you can follow along, and you will notice a wild result.
yeah. So you're 20 years old, and you're going to rent for 10 years. And let's just say that average through time is $2,200 a month.
$2,200 per month in rent.
$240,000 you spent in 10 years with nothing to show for it. By the way, if you had $240,000, you had to make more than that to have it because you have taxes, etc. Quick on that, that 500 could be made up so quickly if you just look at your lifestyle, watch what you're spending, and decide, for example, do you need to eat at a fancy restaurant or can you just have a dinner at home?
Wow. So, Pat, rent, simple as $2,200 a month, 10 years, $240,000. Yeah, I knew it was something like that. I hadn't really identified it. Now, what if we go and buy a property that has a similar value of something you would rent for, say, $2,200 per month? So let's say we bought a property in a location that allowed for a $350,000 home. Okay, let's do a modest down payment of 5%. And let's assume an interest rate of 7%. I threw some quick numbers out, but don't worry, they're on the screen. Now the payments, let's highlight the payments on this graphic right now. Renting, $2,200 per month, buying $2,700 per month. That's a $500 payment difference, right? That's the big stigma, the big thorn in the side that tends to make people think it is far more doable to rent, I better do that. However, let's keep these numbers going. We talked about appreciation in real estate, right? Naturally, the value of your property goes up. And every month when you make a loan payment to your home, unlike renting, you're going to see that loan balance go down. So a number on the screen, we have $280,000 loan balance. That's your loan balance after 10 years. So now let's highlight, how much equity do you have when you rented for 10 years? Zero. When we go to buying, how much equity, the difference between how much you owe your loan balance of $280,000 compared to the now value 10 years later, 3% appreciation per year, very modest. Your value is now $470,000. What is our net difference here? We have $190,000 that we gained over just a 10-year period. Okay, Pat, it's undisputable how clear the evidence is of that comparison on just how different your financial standing can be in the long run, 10 years later. But how about that initial upfront monthly payment difference of $500 per month? What are your thoughts when you see that difference and when you're working with your own buyers?
All right, Andrew, that $500. Now, a lot of times we, in our lives, we kind of force ourselves to save money because we want something, correct? So you look at that 500, and if you're saving money, you're probably not cheating your life anyway, and you're putting it for a greater use in the future, right? That's $17 a day. Just a little shy of $17 a day. Is there a possibility that you could save $17 a day? I bet you if you started writing it out, you could probably save $30 a day.
That's a great way to look at it, and probably a way that I wouldn't have looked at it yet. But yeah, if you can break it down to the nuts and bolts, work from the ground up, make it small, and reverse engineer it. Because you were talking about that $500 a month difference seems substantial, but when you break it down to one day, it's $17 per day. How can you change different things without sacrificing quality of life?
Exactly.
Was a big one. Now, I really love how you drove home that we might see a cost difference. The typical person might look and see $500 a day. That's a substantial cost difference. But what you're telling me, and what I also agree with, is that's really just you forcing a savings account. Because look at that $190,000 gain in 10 years. The differences of those two scenarios. So just consider it, sure, if buying and owning might be $400 or $500 more a month, just ask yourself, are you ready to sign up to save a little more money to better your financial future?
Yes.
All right, Pat. So we've broken down the numbers behind those two circumstances of renting and buying. I think one thing that might be helpful, let's give them something that's relatable and talk about two different people and what might work best for them and why. So with that, let's consider Alex. Alex is 29 years old. He lives in Spokane, and he prefers the higher cost areas of Spokane, more of that luxury style feel. He's in a condo downtown while he's here for work. Alex tends to relocate every 1 to 2 years. He is ultra dedicated to his career, kind of a workaholic, and that's why he's making so many moves and trying to climb the corporate ladder. With that, Alex really, because of all the moving expenses and bouncing around, and he kind of likes to live a little lavishly with his downtown high-rise condo that he pays quite a bit in rent for, he's only got $1,500 in savings.
Alex.
I know. Come on, Alex.
What are you doing, bro?
Money comes in, money goes out, okay? 50% of his income is going towards debt payments, and the rest of his disposable income is really just going towards his lifestyle that he works very hard for and enjoys. With that, would Alex be better suited to rent or to try and buy that downtown condo?
I think, Andrew, in this situation with Alex, he's better off renting. Why? Because it's flexible for him. He's not stuck in one spot. He can take his money, invest it pretty much anywhere he wants. And he avoids being house poor and stuck in one location because he doesn't know where he's going to be next year, maybe even next month. And so for him, definitely better renting.
Yeah, and sometimes people are just in a different spot where, he's climbing the corporate ladder and he's really putting tunnel vision all in on that career. His earning potential from being able to free up his time and put it all towards his career is probably much more beneficial than, right now, the difference in the long run. He might be able to make 50 grand more a year, 100 grand more per year, right? And then he doesn't have to worry about when, I have a frozen pipe and now I have to take my step back from my career, make sure my house is good, and he's going to get that flexibility.
Yes.
I agree with you. Alex should rent. Okay, Pat, let's talk about Jordan. Jordan is 35 years old. Jordan has a stable career, stable income. He's worked there for many years. He wants to stay in one area for 5 years. He's got someone that's very special to him. He's ready to start settling down. And with that, Jordan has had some time to accumulate some savings. He's got a nest egg, $20,000 that he can plan to use. And if he uses that, it's not every penny that he has to his name. He's also been working on his credit score. He's got good credit. And he's got what he would call manageable debt. It's about only, say, maybe 30% of his overall income. And with that, he really wants to start focusing on, with his progression in life and a family and kids, he's really thinking about longer-term financial picture. How he's going to pay for college, retirement, you name it. With that, what do you think about Jordan? What might benefit him the most at this point in time?
He definitely is ready. I mean, he's lived that life of a 20-year-old. He's starting to settle into this 30-year-old life. And it, for him, just the idea of having a home, a little stability. And let's face it, there's a point in time where ownership kind of makes people feel good about themselves. And it kind of makes a statement. Not that it has to happen, that statement, but it gives them stability, which he's really looking forward to.
Absolutely. And when he starts to think about that long-term financial picture, I mean, we just broke down how just 10 years can make a difference. Alex is at that point where he should have, at least double his current age left over. So he's in life, right? So he's got 30, 40, maybe 50 years or more potentially. And with that, that's a long time. For the sooner you start with that ownership, the more that can compound. And instead of 190,000 become, 380, become, beyond there up to as high as $1 million is not unreasonable.
Not at all.
Out of the question.
So I'd even encourage you to think about your next 5 to 10 years, your goals. Are you building wealth or are you just avoiding responsibility? Drop your situation in the comments. Are you renting or buying right now?
Yeah, let's hear it. If building wealth by making a smart start today gets you fired up, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss next week's episode, where we'll be giving you the full roadmap for how you should prepare yourself to be in a position to buy. Follow us on social media to stay connected, or schedule a free call with us in the link below, the Calendly link, where I would be more than happy to chat with you and determine, are you ready and in that position to buy? Your smart start is closer than you think. We'll see you next time. Bye.